If you're looking to get some better throttle response and some better efficiency for your 2024 or newer Tacoma, this performance cold air intake in red is a solid solution. Now, thanks to the fairly open design here, the high flow filter, and the straight through style intake tube, this option is great for the Tacoma owner who's seeking an easy way to get a little bump in performance with a bolt-on mod, especially if you're looking to pair it with other mods or even a tune. Now, while a tune isn't required here, this intake will still help with the efficiency of the system, and the high flow oiled filter is great if you want a free-flowing system that has optimal filtration. I do want to mention that with the heat shield design ultimately comes a little bit less protection compared to some closed box options, so this is great for street driving and lighter off-road applications where you're not seeing too much water or other debris that may get to the filter. Now, this features a straight-through style intake tube to relieve all of the restriction that the factory tubing brought to the table, increasing airflow for better fuel efficiency and bettering the performance, especially in a boosted application. Now, this also features a high-flow oiled filter that helps with the flow thanks to the more open material and using that oil to catch all those micro-contaminants trying to get through, ultimately cutting down on maintenance with the washable and reusable design. In addition to the function, this also is just going to elevate the styling underneath the hood compared to the boring factory plastics with the bright red intake tube for a sporty look, and you will end up getting a big increase in induction noise underneath the hood with this kit, which is always going to bring a smile, especially in a turbo application. Now, getting into the build of each of the components on the table here, the heat shield here is made of a durable steel material that seals to the hood to keep all of the engine heat soak away from the filter. And the intake tube is made of a 3-inch mandrel bent aluminum to reduce heat buildup while boasting a very bright red polished appearance with a little bit of a metallic flake to it. So you're not just getting a red coating, but you're also getting a little bit of a premium look to this as well. And then it's topped off with a dual core washable and reusable high flow cotton filter at the front. The kit also comes with all stainless steel hardware for a rust-free design when it comes to the clamps, high temp resistant silicone couplers, and all the other odds and ends that are required for a question-free install. Now, this is roughly $500 and it's fairly average for a cold air intake in the category. Now, what stands out about this design is that it takes a no-fuss approach. It has the heat shield application that provides good protection without completely encasing the filter for good airflow, and it's just a generally simple setup to make the process hassle-free. You also get a very sporty look with it compared to the factory version, and you're getting a lot of function out of this, especially again in a turbo application. An intake, whether you pair it with a tune or not, or other mods or not, is going to make a difference in the performance day to day. So if you're looking for a hassle-free way to get a bump in performance and a good look underneath the hood, then this is going to be a perfect choice for you. Now, install is a very easy 1 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. It's probably going to take about 2 hours or so to get the job done with some pretty basic hand tools. However, at this point, I'm going to hand it over to one of our installers here. They're going to show you a detailed breakdown on how you can get this bolted up to your Tacoma at home. So that wraps it up for what I have to say. Let's go ahead and get into the install.
All right, for this install, you would need a 3/8 ratchet, a Phillips head screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, a flathead pocket tool, a 3mm Allen head wrench or socket, 10mm and a 7mm socket with a various adapter, a razor blade, and a pair of side cutters. Today we're going to be installing an intake on our Tacoma. Let's get started. All right, first thing we're going to do is remove our snorkel assembly, and then we're going to move on to our rad support cover. First, we're going to push these few pins inside here. They're plastic push pins. We can push them down with a flathead, or we can use our finger and just press them down, and then we're going to use our flathead on each and pry one up. Once you have the clips out of the way, you can now lift up on your whole entire assembly and remove it. We're going to move on to our rad support cover. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 pins on either side. We're going to push in each and pop it out. Once you have the last one out, there's 2 more in the center here. Push it on each. Get in there with a flathead. All right, now that we have these 2 out, there are 2 more just in front, tucked underneath the front bumper assembly and the grille. It's kind of hard to see, so you can push down and remove those clips. All right, once you have all of those out, you can lift up and remove the entire assembly. All right, now we're gonna move on to our mass airflow sensor. We're gonna use a flathead and pry up on this connector. Release that. And we're also gonna unplug our mass airflow sensor from the air box itself. And tuck that off to the side. All right, now that we have our mass airflow unplugged, we are going to move on to either the top section of the charge tube, top or bottom. You can remove either way in one piece. We're gonna choose to remove the bottom section first. We're gonna go in there with a 10mm stubby socket. Undo the tension. And then we can move over to unlatching our airbox. And we can twist and remove this in one piece. Might need to get a flathead under there and pry up. All right, now we're gonna remove our stock air filter, and we can pull up on our stock intake box and remove the entire assembly. All right, now that we have our stock intake air box off, we're gonna transfer over our mass airflow sensor. We're gonna do this by removing the 2 Phillips head screws right on top. You're gonna want a relatively skinny screwdriver with a smaller bit to get into these small screws. You want to take note of the orientation of whichever direction. Kind of want to line up your intake tubes the same direction so that way you can install it into the right order. And you just want to get those snugged up. Don't put too many pressure on there because you could crack the sensor. All right, now that we have our mass airflow sensor transferred over, we're going to install our sleeve. For demonstration purposes, we're going to put this on now so you can better get a view of it and where it goes. There is an alignment slot for the mass airflow, and we're going to make sure that's seated all the way through. All right, now we can move on to our assembly for the new intake. We're actually going to transfer over any 2 of these grommets on the bottom to go onto the body. We're going to use a small flathead screwdriver and pry on the back and apply pressure and remove the grommets. All right, now that we have our grommets out, we can install them into the new housing, and this will fit down into the body. All right, now we're gonna take our boot and our clamp and place it over the intake tube. Place our clamp. And we're gonna tighten this up with our 7mm or a flathead if you have that. All right, just make sure it's even all around and give it a good tighten. All right, once you have the bottom one on, you can take your top clamp and just rest it on there, and we're gonna come back and tighten that up after we get our intake pipe in. All right, now we can take our intake pipe and place that in. If you need to, you can use some silicone lubricant to get that in. We're gonna set that in place, and bring our clamp up, come back in with the 7mm. and snug that down. You can come back and make any adjustments if you need to for direction and placement issues. All right, now we're gonna take our rubber gasket and install it around our intake opening. And this is on our heat shield. We're just gonna start it there. It's good to hold one end in and then work your way around. Once you get it halfway through, you shouldn't need to really hold on to it too much. All right, once you get that pressed evenly and you met the other side, you're gonna wanna trim at least a 1/16 of an inch back from where you started, so that way you can get nice gapping. All right, now that I started with my blade, I'm gonna come back in and finish the cut with some side cutters. We can tuck that back. It's okay if there's a little gap there. It still will seal all the way around. All right, we can move on to our bottom seal. Again, we're gonna press the channel in and work our way around. All right, once we get that pressed all the way in, we're gonna continue working. You can choose to, if you want, to cut a divide in that bend and fit it into however direction you want. For our demonstration purposes, we're not gonna cut all the way through. We're only gonna trim right up to this spot right here, and we're gonna let it sit flush. All right, once we get to that point, we'll mark it with our blade and then cut the rest off. All right, now we can mark this with our blade. And come back and use side cutters and finish the rest off. All right, one thing I do want to note, you can cut this last piece right here at an angle so that way it can fit better towards the end. Press it all down and now you're ready to install. All right, now we're gonna install our heat shield onto the factory grommet mounts, the ones closest to the engine bay. We'll lift up on our intake tube. Apply some pressure onto our mounts. And make sure we untuck our gaskets if they were folded under in the insulation. All right, now we're gonna remove our clamp from our intake. Place that off to the side, and our intake, and pull back our shield. And we're gonna put our clamp on the outside of the heat shield, and then slide our intake on, and then fit the intake through the gasket that we put on. Might need to use some silicone lubricant. Once that's through, you can push that all the way on. Place your clamp in position. Make sure it's on all the way around. And then you can tighten up. All right, now we can tighten up our clamp. I like to position mine to the easiest accessible spot once everything's buttoned up. Here we're gonna go with the 9 o'clock position, and we're gonna use a flat head and tighten that down. All right, just wanna snug that up, make sure it's secure, and we can install our cover. All right, now we can move on to our shroud cover. The first thing we're gonna do is install this rubber grommet right in the center, and we can pinch that on its side and work that in place. There is a halfway slit so it can fit into the slot. Once that's fully seated, All right, once that's fully pressed in, we can move on to our outer gaskets. Again, we can come in here with our knife, or we can just use our side cutters. All right, once we get this all pressed together, we're actually going to trim back about 1.5 inches so we can clear our plastic bracket. We're going to be installing a clip-on. We can continue around with our gasket. Once that's fully pushed down, you can mark it with your knife. Pull a little bit back out, and then trim to fit. Move on to our side piece with the remaining gasket. Once you have that pressed on, again, peel back a smidge and trim to fit. All right, now we can install our shroud. One tab will go underneath this plastic bracket and the other one will go on top. But the main thing we want to focus on is getting this grommet over our hood bushing. And we can install our factory plastic push pins into the shroud cover. Once we have that seated, we can now move on to our airbox cover. All right, now we can come on with our intake box cover. Place it right on top. Get our mounting screw lined up with the provided hardware. We're going to tighten this down with our 3mm Allen head. Once you get one started, you can move on to the other two. And then finally, the one in the opposite corner. Once I have all your screws in, you can tighten it up with your T-handle or whatever Allen bits you have. All right, just make sure everything's fully seated and there are no wires or anything pinching in the way when you close your hood. Factory mass airflow sensor plugged in up top on the intake tube. You're gonna wanna slide your cable underneath, come around and plug that in on the other side. All right, once you have the intake button up, you can come back in with your shroud, place it back over, and use the push pins and reinstall them into position. We got two in the front, tucked underneath the grill right here, close to the hood latch. And for these clips, to get them back to the open position, you just want to push in from the bottom and clip them in. All right, once you got that secure, everything should be buttoned up. Just make sure there's no moving parts. All right, that wraps up our install for a performance cold air intake in red color on 24 to 26 Tacoma. Just remember, for everything Tacoma related, keep it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.